What's up? This is Diva, delivered, inspired, victorious, anointed, and I'm here with my fellow hoodlums, and we about to talk some trash. Today, we're going to do a little bit of talking about some documentaries that are currently on Netflix that you can watch too. We're going to talk about In Our Mother's Gardens. We're going to talk a little bit about A Song for Latasha, and then we're going to talk about the documentary High on the Hog, which is about really African and African American cooking and the fusion between the two. So, what particularly stuck out for me with this, the In Our Mother's Gardens, first of all, was just the name of it. Because when I saw the name, my daughter had told me about it and some other people were talking about it. And so I said, In Our Mother's Gardens, my goodness, this must be about planting, you know? But it was really about us as individuals being the fruits or the vegetables or whatever, the yield of our mother's gardens, and how our mothers, grandmothers, aunties influenced us. And so I wanted us to kind of, instead of talking about what the ladies in the documentary talked about, we all have our own stories. We all have that eccentric aunt or that great grandmother who was a badass, or whatever. And I wanted us to kind of share those stories. And even though it would be my inclination to go first, I'm not going to do that. Sandra, I want you to start and tell us a story about anything that strikes you about the women in your family, that you remember.
Well, for me, where I am today, I can simply say use the cliche that the women in my family were strong Black women and are strong Black women. That's a crown I don't like to wear today.
Mm-hmm.
Back, my grandmother, she even in her, 80s was walking miles, carrying bags and stuff like that. And my mother, my grandmother only had 2 children, but my mother had 9.
Okay.
And she always made it happen, just to connect that high on the hog, I see so much of my culture, African culture, coming from the Caribbean, right there in that show that my mother, I remember my mother made curry mango for dinner.
Ooh, that sounds good.
Oh, but back then it's like, where's the meat?
Oh,
but
see, I didn't even think about that.
And it was on, over some rice but she was an excellent, excellent, excellent cook. I don't think my mother ever made anything in the kitchen that maybe in her later years, when she's, in her 90s, try to fix something and, she may have messed it up. But growing up, my mother never fixed anything that tasted terrible. She made her own bread. We didn't go, to go to the bakery to get bread was, far and few in between. We would maybe she ran out of bread, Friday, but Saturday she made like loaves and loaves of bread. The friends in the neighborhood would come over, because they know they got to eat some warm bread out the oven, real nice, So, and that's the culture that I came up with. We didn't eat a lot of fast food. All the food was cooked at home. Mom was the cook. Granny was a good cook too, but mom endured a lot for her children, to provide for her children. She was always an advocate for us, whether it was finding jobs for us, her children, her nephews and nieces. She was always, she was that person, and it has trickled down, to other generations, but, now, I feel a little differently about that title, but we're not going to get into that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it makes sense because being strong, we have been the pack mules of the human race. We know that. And it makes it a little bit different to embrace that, especially when we are trying to begin self-care. Because for a lot of us, self-care is a new concept. So, Pia, do you have some stories or some anecdotes that you remember that stick out in your mind?
Oh, too many really. My mom. Well, first of all, I was adopted.
Mm-hmm.
So, my biological mother, there was some mental illness involved. So, me and my siblings were put into the foster care system very early on,
Mm-hmm.
and I kind of bounced around. I believe from 9 months up until I was about 4
Mm-hmm.
before I was placed in a permanent home.
Mm-hmm.
But I talk about my mother in a sense of she was very adamant in raising us and being about, I'm not your friend. I was commissioned to be your mother. I was not commissioned to be your friend. My mom was very and is very, straightforward, tell it like it is, but tell you the truth in love. Um, just very full of love, so but at the same time, she was stern. I like to think of my mother as being a boy mom because
Mm-hmm.
I have an older brother and recently she just adopted another child, a little boy. And she is a boy mom all day long.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Whereas me and my mom's dynamic growing up, she was tougher on me,
Mm-hmm.
I guess, because she raised me to be, independent and not have to be out here damsel in distress. You
Mm-hmm.
always need to be able to take care of yourself because she lost her parents at an early age. Her father and her aunt, if I'm not mistaken, died together. Um, they were doing something and got electrocuted, and they both died. And then her mother died early, so she being the oldest of her siblings, she had to step up a lot to help and raise them. So I think she was without her parents, both parents. I found she was in 8th grade.
Mm. Wow.
So she really had to, between her grandparents also helping to raise them, but she, had to learn how to, make it through life very quickly and grow up very, quickly. So I think she's a very determined person.
Mm-hmm.
She knows how to make $1 out of 15 cents because she came
Mm-hmm.
from not having much, but she was big on family and that family is all that you have. And at the end of the day, you need to be able to rely and lean on family. So she really tries to instill that in me and my brothers to make sure that we stay connected. And so I have a closer sense to family on my mother's side because of that. My dad's side, them jokers, we don't get together until somebody dead.
Mm-hmm.
Hence yesterday. My aunt died and the most that I've seen of them was at her funeral. But and we all say, we need to get together more than when somebody dies or whatever. But my mother is very much family oriented,
Mm-hmm.
hard worker.
That's what I'm saying now. My mother, and I think I may be a lot like her, because my mother was quite a character. She was known for allowing people into her house to eat. There were 7 of us. My mother was an only child, and so she had 7 children. And so she was always our house was a neighborhood house. But I remember this one time that my mother and her friend, I'm not going to say names because I don't want to say other people's names, but everybody who knows know who it was. They beat this man up, a grown man, because we were in the street playing. right over by my aunt's house. We were in there playing, and we, kids back then, we could play in the street. It wasn't that big of a deal because it wasn't that much traffic in Southport. So we were just chilling, playing in the street. And this man who was from out of town came up there and said, "You kids get out of the street," and start fussing at us. And we, our parents wasn't out there. We was fussing back. This man reached out and slapped one, two, three children. It was about eight of us. We went and got our mamas. And let me tell you something. My mama, Earla May, okay? Earla May came out there with a yardstick about this big around, and her friend was going upside this man's head. Do y'all hear me? And my daddy, when my daddy came, he fell through the glass of his truck, and he had a piece of glass here, and so he had to have surgery, and he was all bandaged up. And every time my mama drew back to hit that man in the head with that stick, my daddy's hand went up there and blocked her. But that's who my mama was. She was fiercely loyal. She loved her children. And honey, one night, this is funny too. Everything is centered around fighting, believe it or not. My one night we were coming back from a game because the local there was the gym was right there, so everybody in the neighborhood would walk. This was a middle school dance or a game or something, I can't remember. But we were walking back home, and it was a lot of kids following us trying to start a fight. And somebody called my mom and told her that your children out there trying to fight in the street. So she came and got us. She came and snatched us up, is more accurate. And then when we started just about to round the corner, um, the girl said, "You better be glad she's taking your A word home before we beat it." My mom said, "That's it, go, go." And she sent us, and we better not lose. And we fought that night. But my mama was, everybody that knew her loved her because she was generous and she was kind, but she did not play about her children. Now she might get us and jack us up, not nothing abusive, but get us together. But when it came to somebody else from the outside, she had this saying. Now, when we circle the wagons, if you on the outside, you done seen a bad day. Because when we circle the wagons, that means, and my family's big, there's seven of us. My mother, although she was an only child, her mother was the grandchild of some, or great grandchild, something like that, of somebody who had 11 kids. And so this was a big family, and we were all right there in the same area. So it was the thing, that's some of the things I remember about my mom, those things that make me laugh. And I think that what our mothers pour into us, whether we learn it by watching them or we learn it by them sitting down and telling us, is that we, as Black women, have a huge responsibility to our community. They may never say that. Our parents may never have said that, but I think they showed us by their actions. My mom showed me by always allowing kids to come and spend the night, and allowing them to, even though we were not rich by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, my daddy worked, he was a longshoreman, and he had an upholstery shop. So he was always working. He had seven kids back then, back in the 70s, late 60s, 70s, that time, when it was difficult for people. And my mom stayed at home. My mom stayed at home until my youngest brother went to school. Then my youngest brother went to school. My mom went back to school. I guess that's where I got it from. She went back to school and got her business degree. And then she was the first Black person to work for county government in Brunswick County. So, you know, so that's the garden. And I think that just some of the things that they were talking about, some of the things that stood out for me, and I can't say her name right, and I don't want to butcher it, but the lady, Dr. I think Coca, with the earrings and the jewelry and stuff, and just her explaining how she was a woman who was learning how to make jewelry in a place where they only let men do it, and how her earrings and her everything she wears is almost like she's putting on body armor. And I think that as women of color in this society, we really have to put on armor every time we go out. What do y'all think about that? And what type of armor do you put on when you go out into the world? Sandra, talk to me. What kind of armor do you put on when you go out into the world?
No, I'm, I'm like, I put on that, I'm all right. You know what I mean? I'm blessed and highly favored,
Mm-hmm.
um, regardless of what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and for a number of reasons, because of the work that I do, I'm taking that to work with me. Also because, I've been given a peace by God, that regardless of what I'm going through, because I used to suffer with anxiety attacks,
Mm-hmm.
you know, things used to, when it was about what I can do to fix it. You understand what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And when you when you don't have a way to fix something, then you have that anxiety,
Mm-hmm.
right? But when you learn to go over to God, you get a peace.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you, because like my son right now, he has COVID,
Mm.
you know, and so, you know, God knows my heart.
Mm-hmm.
He knows that I'm, and when I pray, I ask God to touch him and heal him, and he's doing, he's coming along. He's not in the hospital, you know. But like I said, I have a peace. I'm not wearing that on my shoulder.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you know,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
not, so that's the kind of armor. I guess you would have to say the armor of God, but I call it my I'm all right face, because that's what I see all the time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, women, black and white women in the work that I do. How you doing? I'm all right. But when I start digging, you know,
Yeah.
there's a lot that we bury. That's why I say
Yeah.
that strong black woman. One day we'll talk about that. That crown that we all rushed in to wear.
Mm-hmm.
um, I've had enough, really. I mean, it is what it is, because, I know that, I handle a lot of things. I do it, but I know that I'm not really doing it, that God is really, you know, my crutch, my support, that he's seeing. So I try to step back from it,
Mm-hmm.
way that I would humble myself, as opposed to a way, as opposed to wanting to crown myself.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
I'm this strong black woman. I don't think that it doesn't feel right. I should say,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't feel right.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in the last 15 years or so, um, because so much would happen, and I would say, God, give me strength. God, give me strength, as opposed to dealing with what I was feeling. You
Mm-hmm.
know, more of that. I'm fine. There's a joke that they say, if Hollywood ever runs out of actors and actresses, all they have to do is come into the black church.
Mm.
When you ask people, how you doing today? They go, oh, I'm fine, thank you. I'm blessed and highly favored. Da, 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 da. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
all the while inside, you know, they toe up from the flow up.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah, yeah. So that's where I am, and the great thing about having a relationship with God is that, I can bear all this to him.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I don't have to worry about it being said anywhere else.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
what's said to God, it stays with God.
That's it.
So yeah.
So Pia, what about you? Thank you, Sandra. What about you, Pia? What armor do you put on when you go out into the world?
I think my very first piece of armor that I ever had was my sense of humor.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's just I don't consider myself a comedian, but I do hear comedians say that a lot of times um, their comedy comes from a very dark place.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, growing up, being picked on a lot, and my thing was if I could get to the punchline quicker than them, they would leave me alone.
Yeah.
So I was quick with it, um, with the humor. I could go a little bit more in depth with it, and that helped out a lot. Being able to have a sense of humor, even if it's cynical or whatever. Um, I can be a chameleon.
Mm-hmm.
I have no choice but to be a chameleon
Mm-hmm.
and code switching.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's always a sense of there's a heightened awareness, but it's also very tiring
Yes.
because in a world where you're surrounded by whiteness that either A is outright um, racist or has deep implicit bias,
Mm-hmm.
or they're oblivious to a lot of things, so they just don't know
Mm-hmm.
and have never been taught. You have to always carry yourself in such a way um, that you don't fall into the traps of the stereotypes and things like that. And just being able, to code switch. I can go into a boardroom, I can give a presentation, I can do all of those things, but at the same time, if I go across the creek with my family and we're shooting slang, or if I'm in a project, I don't have to be that, you know, perfect English type of
Mm-hmm.
girl. So being able to bob and weave, if you will, is in some ways a sense of armor, but it becomes very exhausting
Yes.
because I don't. It depends on where you are on when you can truly be your authentic self.
Mm-hmm.
Black people are offended
Yeah.
by your blackness. Not that not my fault. You know what I mean? But you're always having to stay a step ahead of what could come or what's around the corner or how you're being perceived. I never forget when my parents were going somewhere and a Jehovah's Witness came to the house, and I just told him, like, when my parents aren't home, and he was like, "You speak very well. You must not be from around here." And I was like, "No, I'm from here."
Mm.
Well, clearly your parents had to send you to a boarding school or send you off to a private school somewhere. And I was like, "Well, what makes you think that?" It's like, because you don't sound like you're from here. You speak too well
Mm-hmm.
to be from here. And I always thought about Chris Rock in his stand-up comedy, and when people talked about Colin Powell, and it's like, "Oh, he speaks so well." If black people are not expected to sound proper or be able to put a subject and a verb together and they actually agree, that sort of thing. So I became very aware of that early on. But at the same time, that intelligence factor and your ability to move and bob and weave can also become a way for your own people to ostracize you.
Yes.
Because there was a point in time in my life where I talked too proper. So, talking proper was akin to being white.
Mm-hmm.
You were trying to be white.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the same time, I wasn't black enough for some people. So I've always been in this weird space, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But the main thing for me has always been, I believe, my sense of humor to kind of shield and protect myself from the darts or daggers and things like that, and just always being aware
Yeah.
of where I am and surrounding. that becomes a shield because the more aware you are, you know how to respond in certain
Exactly.
situations.
Exactly.
But that has only come with, it gets better, I think, with experience.
Mm-hmm.
You get more wise on when to speak and when not to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And when you do speak, how to do it in such a way that, you don't come off as being the angry black woman. Um, and then in those situations, like I know I'm in this weird place right now. I'm pretty sure they don't know what to do with me.
Yeah.
So, and I like that. That's a very powerful position when they don't
Yeah.
know what
It
quite to do
is.
with you. They can't get. They can't get rid of you, but at the same time, they can't predict my next move, which so I like that.
And you will not be denied. You will not be denied. Period. Because I know that about you. You ain't finna sit back and let nobody treat you any kind of way. And I think that really is. And like you were talking about using your sense of humor, I think that I have used my words, my ability to put words together in a certain way as a poet. So, and like when I was a little kid, I used to literally sit down on the floor and read the dictionary. And so I have, when kids start playing the dozens and they talking about each other and stuff like that, then I just go and get one of my dictionary words, honey, my 5 or 6 syllable words. And then they just looking at me like, they got to go look up what I just called them, so that was kind of my thing. It was always the fact that my voice is not a soft voice. I'm very loud and I'm very confident. And even when I'm not confident, people don't know because that's what I use. I will walk into a room and I could be nervous, knees knocking together. But when I stand up or sit down and talk to people, they think I know what I'm talking about, even if I don't. But I used to say this thing when I was in the 6th grade: if you can't dazzle them with brilliance, baffle them with BS. And that's my armor. That's my armor. I sound like I think I sound like I know what I'm talking about enough to where people be like, oh, okay. So that's my armor. That's what I've always used. I want to kind of shift gears a little bit and I want to move to a song for Latasha. Um, I remember this. I remember when Latasha Harlins was killed. And I always felt like it didn't really get enough attention. I always felt like, you know, having the video that showed this woman and the fact that she had the money in her hand, and it's really a case of being profiled. She was racially profiled, and a 15-year-old girl was shot by a 51-year. Now, isn't it interesting that their ages, one is the other one backwards? One was 15, the other was 51. Had lived that long and could not see that a little girl, a 15-year-old, because a 15-year-old is a little girl. I don't care how tall she is. I don't care whatever her body looks like. She is. Wake up, Sandra Carter. She's she. That's all right. That's all right. Love you. It's okay. I understand you do a lot of stuff. Um, but as a 15-year-old girl, why can't our girls be girls? Why can't Black girls be allowed to grow up slowly? You know what I'm saying? We are, I mean, we could each probably tell stories of how a grown man said something out the way to us, probably at age 9 or 10 or 11 or 12, but we're still little girls at age 15. Shoot, I was still a little girl at age 21 because I didn't really know anything. I hadn't really been anywhere. The first time I really left home, like really left home, was when I joined the Army and I was 21. And I was so very immature about the world and about life. I was still a little girl, but yet people look at us as Black women. And just because we develop a certain way, they look at us as women while we're still girls. And a lot of young girls lose their innocence because of that. And I think that is the whole tragedy of a song for Latasha, is that we never really knew who she was until this documentary. What did you think about it, Pia?
It was heartbreaking. Um, the the thought of what could have been,
Mm-hmm.
because she was so brilliant. When was it her sister that reads the essay that she wrote, or a poem
Mm-hmm.
that she wrote, her sixth grade year in
Mm-hmm.
school, and just the level of confidence that she had, the amount of care she took for other people, and just her best friend, because she saved her best friend
Yeah.
who was being drowned in a pool.
Mm-hmm.
And, tell her, you were lucky I was walking by here, and
Mm-hmm.
um, it's like, well, I'm not coming out here no more. She's like, no, you're good, because I'll be with you. You're little, you need someone looking out for you. It's that, again, that heightened sense of awareness, the care for people,
Mm-hmm.
um, her desire to want to be a lawyer, to want to help her family, already coming from a traumatic experience, losing her
Yeah.
mother very young.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but, you know, to your point of at what point do, we go from being little girls to, women, I think, just in general, Black children,
Mm-hmm.
none of us know the age
Mm-mm. Mm-mm.
that we go from being these cute little Black children to a threat,
Yeah.
you know, because it's not just, it's not just Latasha. You think about Tamir Rice.
Exactly.
How 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 often or how common is it, you know, for young white males to be given a real rifle, especially in the South, very young, because they love to hunt, right? And
Yeah.
teaching their children to hunt and how to use a gun and all of that. So, and then this whole society of, growing up back in the day and boys playing the cowboys and Indians, that sort of thing. And,
Mm-hmm.
again, with our young girls. But at the same time, Black people have yet to be told at what point are we no longer cute,
Yeah.
innocent children before we're treated as adults. But this has been going on since the beginning of time,
Mm-hmm.
where we criminalize our children. And, statistically, Black children, and even now more so young Black girls, are more likely to be suspended
Mm-hmm.
from school. Black women are your fastest growing population into the prison systems and jail systems, and how we're being criminalized. So implicit bias certainly has a lot to do with that, as well as, racism, systemic racism, and how Black people have been treated for years over time. But this wasn't an isolated case.
Mm-hmm.
This particular store owner, had been known to pull out a gun
Mm-hmm.
on children. And, it breaks my heart to hear our friends say, when she went in, her mother bought the candy bar
Mm-hmm.
and had forgot one and sent the daughter in to get another candy bar, gave her the money. And if it had not been for the prostitute who happened to be in the store, because the same store owner pulled out the shotgun on her. And she was like, no, 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 no. She got her money right here, her mama right outside, and got the receipt and everything, and went and got her mother. Her mother walks in, and the girl is in shock because she's staring down the barrel
Mm-hmm.
of a shotgun. And she told Latasha, don't go back to that store.
Mm-hmm.
They're gonna. I remember, our parents saying that lady is gonna mess around and actually kill somebody,
Mm-hmm.
one day. But the fact that, I I remember the LA riot,
Mm-hmm.
but I did not remember that was one of the catalysts
Mm-hmm.
that sparked it, centered around her killing, and to see no more than a couple $100 fine for community service, and that
Okay.
was it.
That was
And what?
really a slap in the face.
Yeah.
That was a slap in the face. Are you $500? That didn't even pay for the funeral.
Exactly. But my thing is, what makes me more upset, and that's why, you know, I sit back now. I'm not against any culture, any race, any group of people being singled out. But Black people, particularly Black women, because we care for everybody, need to sit this one out when all of this hate started coming out towards the Asian community regarding the coronavirus. And I get it, 45 really spewed that stuff
Mm-hmm.
out there against them, but I don't see other cultures running to our aid
Yeah. Yeah.
with the hundreds of years that we have been oppressed. Not to mention, you know, um, when I think this foreowner was Japanese, but still Asian culture is Asian
No, she was
culture.
Korean. She was Korean.
Was she Korean? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but they have, you know, Japanese people have been held captive and put in different camps back in the day, or one of the world wars and things like that. So
World War
they
II.
coming from another minority to understand what it's like to come from a place of oppression to turn around and oppress other people, and it goes on today. It just only makes me more adamant about the need for African Americans to come together to have our own.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Because
but
it I think it comes from it's not the shark, it's the water that we swim in. And I think when other people from, other cultures, they come here and they are hearing the stories, they're hearing from other people who are not us, that we can't be trusted, we're violent, we're this, that, and the other, but yet we are no more violent or untrustworthy as any other group of people anywhere else. But in this country, the narrative is needed in order to perpetuate the continued oppression. And so it even gets out to other people who are not of the majority. And it's really sad. And I think that even in this whole argument about teaching critical race theory, and I think critical race theory, that's just three words. All we want is an accurate telling of American history. That's really what it is. It's not a whole different, it's an accurate telling of American history. If we had that, other people would not make these assumptions and would not weaponize our melanin, because that's really what it is. It's the weaponization of melanin in this country and in some places throughout the world. And so until we get an opportunity to tell our own stories, like with In Our Mother's Gardens and A Song for Latasha, and even High on the Hog, because I was really surprised about some things that I learned, and how when the guy first went to Africa and he met with this lady who had lived there for a long time and went into the market, and she was talking about okra and how okra was one of the things that followed us to the New World, and how rice was one of those things as well. And so, and those are two things that I don't eat. So I had to ask myself, why don't you eat okra and rice? So I'm going to work on that. Since we got some okra growing out in the garden, I'm going to work on that. But it's hairy and slimy, so y'all pray for me. But I think that
Tell
when
you- Can I
we
just
say,
tell you that it's a staple dish in Trinidad? And my sister, that Carol, I mentioned her name, she can eat okra and rice every day of the week. Okay? So
okay,
after this gets off, I'll give you the recipe. It's so delicious.
okay, well, you know
Okay.
what?
And
And you give me that recipe, and I'm gonna give it to the one who cooks around here, and then I'm gonna do the best I can to at least try it, because it really, for me, Growing up in the Gullah Geechee corridor, anyway, and having rice in the house every single day. But it was because I had a bad experience with rice. Just holding it in my mouth too long because we had Easter practice. Y'all know about Easter practice, right? You're gonna have an Easter program, so you got to go up there and learn how to say your speech and all that stuff. So we had Easter practice, and I was ready to go. I didn't want to sit at the table, but we had rice and cream style corn, and so I held it in my mouth until it kind of liquefied and putrefied. And now every time I eat rice, it activates my gag reflex. So I did eat it at one time. It was just after that. But okra, I never did eat that, but I need to. But that was just understanding and them talking about food and how it connects us to the motherland. And I never really took the time to make the connection, I guess. And even the saying high on the hog, that came from the more you have, the higher on the hog you eat, from the head, down to you eat high on the hog. And it's so interesting that we, as the people of color, as the ones who were preparing the food, um, ended up with what was left over. But even took that was left over and turned it into now chitterlings are a delicacy. And I'm like, oh yeah, really? Now collard greens. What was that? A couple of years ago, one of the stores was selling collard greens with peanuts in it or something like that, and that was supposed to be so fancy schmancy. Do y'all remember what store that was? Was it Macy's or something like? I don't know. It was one of them fancy schmancies. Go ahead, Pia. You were getting ready to say something. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say like with in chitlins, it just well we say chitlins,
Chitlins.
chitlins and hog maws. It's chitlins, hog maws, okra, liver, things like that. There is no in between. It's one of those things. If you like it, if you don't, and it really has to do with your palate and what you like and what you don't like. But we fight over chitlins in my house. Comes the holidays, it's a more of a seasonal thing. Christmas time, we better have somewhere, that sort of thing. But yeah, just being able to create, this soul food.
Yes.
And make it in what it is. And then I love watching who is it, Kaylin react. I think that's his name. When watching people cook, and just take stuff that African American culture is known for. And then here come white people acting like they reinvented the wheel, and they have capitalized off of the cuisine that Black people have made. We can do it with our eyes closed. This is what we do. We don't do no measurement. You just you just automatically know you've been cooking long enough to know when. But yeah, but at the same time though, I think it's good too that we have evolved scientifically from a health perspective to still enjoy these things, but do so more health consciously. That you don't have to put how fat and everything, that sort of thing. Enjoy it, and don't cook everything down to nothing because you've done cooked all the nutrients out of it. That sort of thing. But it's just a beautiful thing. Our culture and knowing the history of where we come from and how things are connected. Even going back to in our mother's garden and talking how she connected the food, to the ancestors.
Yes.
Things like that. She by far was my favorite person.
Oh yes. Oh yes. Because she was so unique.
And sassy and just tell it like it is. I enjoyed everyone's stories, but like the way she just commanded and held her own in a room and to tell those stories about, I don't know if it was a great grandmother that was a seamstress that lived in, the upper echelon of the Black community. She would go to people's homes and do the tailoring and stuff, just coming from just wonderful, powerful, successful Black women. But I just think this all ties into womanist theology
Yeah,
versus, the feminist movement. Because, of course, we weren't given an invitation, quite
exactly.
honestly, to
Exactly.
be a part of the feminist movement. But I think from a womanist theology perspective, we care about the community, the whole community,
Exactly.
not just women,
Mhm.
and our rights, but it's about the community. There's an African proverb that if you teach a boy to read, you educate that one child. But if you teach a young girl, you educate the entire village
Village.
because women reach back and they want to bring the community with them because we certainly have a heart and desire for the entire community. Going back to your mother having that home that was opened up. It wasn't about we have so much, but love was there. And
Yes.
that's the difference because you have so many children and families nowadays that have so many things, but love isn't there.
Yeah.
We'd rather have a home full of love with not a lot of material things versus having a lot of material things and no love.
Exactly.
That's so important. So as long as we have women, particularly Black women, leading the way, leading with compassion,
Mhm.
leading with heart, I think the world is better for it because the Black women that lead in that way.
Well, you know what? This is, Pia, I think that's the perfect ending because we're right there at the time. And so I want to thank you ladies once again for just rolling with me with this hoodlums thing. I know that you're all busy. Like I said, I think I'm the only one who is like semi-retired. I'm only working 3 days a week. But I thank you because I know that y'all wear multiple hats. And I thank you for just hanging in there with me because I really believe that every week I might get a little comment how somebody enjoyed it, and that's really all it's for. If one person gets something out of what we're doing, then we're doing the right thing. So on that note, thank you once again, ladies, for coming and chatting. And we will be back in 2 weeks and we'll be talking about some stuff. Now, y'all know what I'm going to do, so don't nobody go nowhere. All right. Thank you so much for hanging out with the hoodlums, and y'all have a good one. Deuces.